Last time, I sold my plasma to keep the lights on. This time, I was doing it to buy silence. I sat in the cramped waiting room, clutching a voucher for $60. When an elderly man in a bespoke suit sat opposite me, he stared at the yellowed tape on my inner arm and asked, "How much have you bled for them already?" He slid a thick cream envelope across the vinyl seat. "Sign this, and you will never be the one getting drained again." My name is Isla Cooper, and at 28 years old, I had calculated exactly how much my dignity was worth on the open market. Today, the going rate was $60. I sat in the cramped, fluorescent-lit waiting room of the Riverline Plasma Center, shifting my weight on a cracked vinyl chair that smelled faintly of urine and industrial bleach. The air here was thick, a suffocating soup of antiseptic, stale fast food grease, and the collective desperation of 40 people trying to make it to the end of the week. I pulled my cardigan tighter around myself, not because it was cold, but because I felt exposed. I used to be a biodata analyst. I used to wear a white coat in a sterile lab at Helix Point, running samples through centrifuges that cost more than my parents' house. Now, I was the sample. I was the raw material. I looked down at the intake form on my lap, my handwriting jagged. The question asked for my occupation. I left it blank. Above the reception desk, a television mounted on the wall blared a commercial for Black Friday sales. A manic announcer screamed about 70% off flat-screen TVs, while the people in this room counted coins for bus fare. To my left, a college student with dark circles under his eyes was asleep, his head lolling back against the wall. To my right, a man in a stained construction vest was trying to clean dirt from under his fingernails with a Metro card. We were the invisible demographic, the bottom feeders of the economic ecosystem, harvesting our own fluids to keep the lights on. I told myself this was the last time. I had said that last week, right before I passed out in the bathroom stall after giving too much, too fast. I remembered waking up with my cheek pressed against the cold tile, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, and the distinct humiliation of realizing I had hit rock bottom. But then the gas bill arrived, a bright red notice threatening disconnection, and the rent for my shoebox apartment at Silverline Lofts was due in 3 days. Necessity has a way of erasing memory, so here I was again, hydrating with tap water and praying my veins wouldn't collapse. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a relentless, angry vibration against my thigh. I knew who it was before I looked. The Team Cooper group chat had been exploding since 6 in the morning. I unlocked the screen, the blue light stinging my tired eyes. "Mom, your father is panicking. Chase, you need to fix this. Chase, I told you, the supplier is suing me for a breach of contract. It is bogus. I need $5,000 for the retainer, or they are going to garnish the accounts. Dad, we do not have 5,000. Son, we barely have 500. I scrolled up, watching the disaster unfold in real time. Chase, my older brother, the golden boy with the failing bar and the 2 kids he used as emotional shields, was in trouble again, and as usual, the panic was filtering down to me, the designated safety net. No one had asked how I was. No one asked if I had eaten today. No one asked if I had found a new job yet. A new message popped up, specifically tagging me, "Mom Isla. Honey, are you there? Chase is being sued. The house is collateral. We are going to lose everything if you do not help. You are always the strong one. Maybe you could pick up a few extra shifts, or do that donation thing a few times. You are young. You can take it." The text sat there, glowing with a casual cruelty that took my breath away. That donation thing. She made it sound like a hobby, like picking up litter or knitting scarves, not letting a machine pump the life out of me for 45 minutes. I typed out a reply. I am at the center right now. "Mom, this $60 is for my gas bill." I hovered over the send button, my thumb trembling. Then I deleted it. What was the point if I told them I was struggling? They would just tell me I was selfish. Chase had kids. Chase had a business. Isla just had Isla. I was the spare part, the tertiary organ that could be harvested to keep the heart of the family beating. I looked down at my inner elbow. The crook of my arm was a roadmap of my exploitation. A piece of yellowed medical tape from 4 days ago was still stuck there, flanked by a constellation of tiny, bruised puncture marks. Those marks paid for my father's blood pressure medication last month. They paid for my niece's dance lessons the month before. I was a living ATM. But instead of dispensing cash from a reserve, I was dispensing it from my own veins. The bell above the entrance door jingled, cutting through the heavy atmosphere of the room. The automatic doors slid open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The chatter died down. The student next to me woke up. The construction worker stopped cleaning his nails. An old man walked in. He was out of place in a way that was almost violent. In a room full of polyester uniforms and worn-out denim, he was draped in wealth. He was tall, thin, but not frail, wearing a charcoal gray wool suit that fit him with architectural precision. A silk scarf, the color of a storm cloud, was tucked neatly into his lapel. He held a black cane with a silver handle, but he didn't lean on it. He carried it like a weapon. He didn't look at the receptionist behind the glass partition. He didn't look at the security guard who had straightened up, sensing authority. He looked at the room. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue-gray, swept over us like a spotlight searching for a fugitive. He walked straight toward the row of chairs where I sat. The crowd parted for him, legs pulling back, bags being snatched from empty seats. He moved with a silent grace, his leather shoes making no sound on the linoleum. He stopped directly in front of me. I froze. My phone clutched in my hand. He looked at the empty chair opposite me, dusted it off with a gloved hand, and sat down. He crossed his legs, revealing socks that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. For a long minute, he didn't say a word. He just watched me. He looked at my face, studying my features with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then his gaze dropped to the clipboard on my lap. He read the name printed in block letters at the top, Isla Cooper. He didn't blink. "Number 42?" the nurse shouted from the back, her voice harsh and bored. The construction worker stood up and shuffled away. The room filled with the low murmur of conversation again, but the bubble of silence around us remained. The old man leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the head of his cane. "How many times have you sold here, child?" His voice was deep, raspy, carrying the distinct, clipped cadence of the Northeast elite. It wasn't a kind voice. It was a voice used to giving orders that were immediately obeyed. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Excuse me?" "The blood," he said, nodding toward my arm. "How much have you bled for them already?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "I do not know who you are, sir, but I think you have the wrong person." "I never have the wrong person," he replied. He looked at the yellow tape on my arm, his expression tightening with something that looked like anger, though I couldn't tell who it was directed at. "You have your grandmother's chin, stubborn, sharp." I gripped my purse, ready to bolt. Was he a debt collector? Had Chase borrowed money from a loan shark who sent a grandfather to break kneecaps? "I'm just making some extra money," I lied, forcing a smile that felt like plastic stretching over my face. "Saving up for a vacation." He laughed, a short, dry bark of a sound. "A vacation? Is that what they call paying your brother's legal fees these days?" The blood drained from my face faster than any machine could take it. The room spun slightly. "How do you know about that?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was heavy, the paper textured and expensive. He placed it on the vinyl seat between us, then slid it toward me with 2 fingers. "What is this?" I whispered. "An exit strategy," he said. He placed a business card on top of the envelope. It was simple, heavy cardstock with embossed black lettering, but my eyes were too blurry with panic to read the name. "If you sign the papers inside that envelope," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble that only I could hear, "the only person who will be allowed to draw blood from this family again will be you, but it will be on your terms." "I do not understand," I stammered. "Who are you?" "You are Isla Cooper," he said, ignoring my question. You were the top analyst at Helix Point. You found the marker variants in the Hemlock Protocol. You have a brilliant mind, and yet you are sitting in a room that smells of despair. Selling yourself for $60 because your mother knows how to weaponize guilt and your brother refuses to grow up. Every word landed like a physical blow. He knew. He knew everything. He knew about the job I lost, the science I loved, the family that was eating me alive. Not everyone is worthy of you bleeding for them. Isla Cooper, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. They were cold, hard, and terrifyingly intelligent. The intercom crackled overhead, loud and distorted. Isla Cooper, bed 3, Isla Cooper. The sound broke the trance. I stood up instinctively, my conditioning taking over. They called my name. I stood up. That was how it worked. I looked down at the envelope. My hand hovered over it. Take it, he commanded softly. I grabbed the envelope and the card, clutching them to my chest like a shield. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold them. I turned to walk toward the double doors leading to the donation floor, but I paused. I had to know. Why? I asked, looking back at him. Why are you here? The old man didn't stand up. He just watched me with that unreadable expression, sitting like a king on a throne of garbage. Because, he said, and a shadow crossed his face. This time, you are not the one who is going to be drained. He turned his head away, dismissing me, fixing his gaze on the Black Friday commercial on the television. I walked through the double doors, my legs feeling like lead. The nurse was waiting for me, holding a fresh tourniquet. Right here, honey, she said, snapping a latex glove against her wrist. Let's get that vein pumped up. I sat in the donor chair, the vinyl crinkling under me. I placed the cream envelope on my lap, the weight of it pressing down on my thighs. As the nurse swabbed my arm with alcohol, cold and stinging, I looked up at the security camera in the corner of the room. I wondered if he was watching. I wondered what was in the envelope. But mostly, I wondered why the man who seemed to know the exact shape of my soul had waited until I was $60 away from ruin to show his face. The needle slid in, a sharp pinch followed by the deep, dull ache of the draw. I watched my dark red blood begin to flow through the clear tubing, spiraling away from me. Out in the waiting room, the old man sat alone, and for the first time in my life, as the machine began to hum, I was terrified of what signing a piece of paper might cost me, because in my family, nothing was ever free. The rhythmic whir of the centrifuge machine inside the plasma center was a dull, grinding noise, but if I closed my eyes, I could almost pretend it was the sound of the pristine equipment back at Helix Point Biolabs. Almost. The difference was that the centrifuges at Helix Point cost more than a luxury car and spun samples that could determine the fate of new cancer treatments. The machine hooked up to my arm right now was a refurbished unit that smelled of burning plastic and was spinning my own life force to pay for a gas bill that was not even mine. It had not always been like this. 6 months ago, I was a different person. I was Isla Cooper, senior biodata analyst. I had an office with a glass wall overlooking the Cambridge skyline. I wore tailored slacks and silk blouses, not the worn-out leggings and oversized hoodie I was currently hiding in. I made 6 figures a year. I was the golden goose, the one who had cracked the protein sequence for the company's flagship rapid diagnostic test. I remembered the nights I spent in that lab. I would pull 16-hour shifts, fueled by espresso and the thrill of discovery. I loved the silence of the lab at 3 a.m, the blue glow of the monitors displaying protein folding structures. I felt important there. I felt valuable. My work was generating millions of dollars in projected revenue for the board of directors. I thought that if I worked hard enough, if I earned enough, I could finally buy my way out of the crushing guilt that seemed to be my birthright. But money in the Cooper family worked like physics in a black hole. It did not matter how much light I generated. The gravity of my family's needs sucked it all in until nothing escaped. The mantra was always the same. I could hear it in my mother's voice, sweet and cloying. like syrup masking the taste of medicine. Because Chase has kids. That sentence was the punctuation mark on every financial conversation we had for the last 5 years. Isla, the roof on the old house is leaking again, my father would say, looking at his shoes, unable to meet my eyes. The contractor wants $4,000 up front. Why doesn't Chase help, I would ask, already reaching for my checkbook because the guilt of seeing my father stooped and defeated was too much to bear. Oh, honey, you know how it is, Mom would interject, placing a hand on my arm. Chase is investing everything back into the bar right now. He is building a legacy. And besides, Chase has kids. They need braces. They need summer camp. You are single. You have so much disposable income. It is just a roof. It was just a roof. Then it was just the credit card debt my father ran up trying to fix the boiler. Then it was just the property tax bill they forgot to pay. Then it was the specialized tutoring for my nephew because the public school was not supporting his genius. According to Chase, I paid it all. I was the invisible foundation of a house that was slowly crushing me. Meanwhile, Chase was the hero. When he bought a new leased truck for the bar, the family applauded his business acumen. He is investing in the future, they said. When I paid off the $5,000 lien on the family home, nobody said a word. It was expected. I was the resource. Chase was the investment, the memory that stung the most. The one that came back to me whenever I felt the needle slide into my vein was my 27th birthday. I had been looking forward to it for months. I had just finished a grueling project at Helix Point, and for once, I wanted to be celebrated. My parents had promised to take me out for a steak dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. Just us. No talk of debt. No talk of the failing bar. Just a celebration of me. I had bought a new dress for the occasion, a deep emerald green that made me feel sophisticated. I was sitting in my living room, heels on, waiting for the text that they were downstairs. At 6:30, my phone buzzed. Mom. So sorry. Sweetie, little Leo is running a slight fever. Chase is freaking out. We need to go over there and help watch the kids so Chase can manage the bar tonight. We will do dinner next week. Promise, love you. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone, a slight fever. Leo was 7. He did not need 3 adults to manage a low-grade temperature. I took off the emerald dress and put on sweatpants. I ordered a frozen pepperoni pizza and ate it alone on my couch, watching reality television. 2 hours later, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a photo in the family group chat. It was taken in Chase's backyard. My parents were there. Chase was there, holding a beer, laughing with his arm around Dad. Leo was running around in the background, looking perfectly healthy, chasing the dog. They were grilling burgers. The caption read, "Family Barbecue Night. Happy birthday, Isla. We are celebrating you in our hearts." They had not gone to nurse a sick child. They had gone to a party. And they had not invited me because if I was there, the conversation might drift to why Chase could afford craft beer and high-end steaks for a barbecue, but could not pay his own electric bill, which I had quietly settled 2 days prior. I did not reply to the text. That was the night I realized I was not a member of the family. I was a utility provider, like the water company or the electric grid. They only noticed me when the service was interrupted. That was also the month I made my first visit to a plasma center. I had maxed out my credit cards paying for my father's dental surgery, another emergency that Chase could not cover because he had just bought new sound equipment for the bar. My rent was due, and I was short by $300. I remember walking into the center that first time, wearing sunglasses and a hat, terrified someone from Helix Point would see me. I was analyzing blood samples worth thousands of dollars by day, and selling my own for spare cash by night. The irony was so sharp it felt like it was cutting my insides. When my mother found out a week later, I expected her to be horrified. I expected her to say, "Oh my God, Isla, we have taken too much. Stop. Let us help you." Instead, she looked at the bandage on my arm and sighed, a sound that was half pity and half relief. "Oh, honey," she said, "you are so good at enduring things. It is a blessing that you are so healthy. You have always been the strong one. Chase faints at the sight of needles. You know, he could never do that. She framed my desperation as a talent. She turned my financial exhaustion into a character trait. Isla the strong, Isla the provider. The collapse happened 3 months later. It was a Tuesday at Helix Point. I was in the supply closet, looking for a fresh box of pipette tips. Suddenly, the walls felt like they were closing in. The hum of the ventilation system sounded like a scream. My chest tightened, a vice grip crushing my lungs. I dropped the box of tips, hundreds of plastic cones scattering across the floor. I tried to pick them up, but my hands were shaking so violently I could not grip them. I sat on the linoleum floor, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face. I was making 6 figures, and I was eating instant noodles because I had transferred 70% of my last paycheck to cover the legal retainer for a lawsuit Chase was facing regarding a noise complaint. I could not do it anymore. The science required precision, and I was a vibrating mess of anxiety and resentment. I went to my supervisor that afternoon. I told him I needed a sabbatical. I told him I was burned out. I did not tell him I was being cannibalized by my own kin. I took an unpaid leave of absence, thinking the distance would save me. I downsized. I moved out of the luxury apartment and into a studio at Silverline Lofts. It was loud. The heating was unreliable, and the view was of a brick wall, but it was cheaper. I thought that by cutting my expenses, I could stop the bleeding, but I had miscalculated the predator. When I told my family I was taking time off to recover from burnout, they did not hear Isla is sick. They heard Isla is free. "Oh, this is wonderful," Mom had chirped. "Now you have more time for the family." The requests changed form but not intensity, since I wasn't working 16 hours at the lab. I became the default unpaid employee of the Cooper clan. "Isla, can you pick up the kids from school? Chase is meeting a distributor." "Isla, can you come over and look at the bar's inventory spreadsheet? You are so good with data." "Isla, Mom needs a ride to her cardiologist. It is 40 minutes away, and you are not doing anything today, right?" I became a full-time nanny, a chauffeur, and an IT support specialist. And because I wasn't earning a paycheck, the financial demands became even more humiliating. I wasn't writing checks anymore. I was being asked to liquidate the meager savings I had left. "Just until the bar turns a profit," Dad would say. "We are a team, Isla." But a team has players who pass the ball. We were not a team. We were a parasite and a host. I looked down at the tube running from my arm to the machine. The centrifuge spun, separating the golden plasma from the red blood cells. The red cells would be returned to me, but the plasma, the part that carried the proteins, the antibodies, the nutrients, was kept. That was exactly what was happening to my life. My family took the nutrients, the gold, the parts of me that had value, and they pumped the depleted, exhausted remains back into my body so I could wake up and do it all over again. Selling plasma stopped being an emergency measure and became a routine. It was the only way I could generate cash that they did not know about. It was my secret stash, kept in a separate digital wallet, used to pay for my own groceries, my own gas, the few things I could still claim as mine. I checked the time on the wall clock. 20 minutes left. I thought about the envelope the old man had given me. It was sitting on the little side table next to the donor chair, underneath my phone. The cream paper looked alien against the sterile, industrial surroundings. "Not everyone is worthy of you bleeding for them." He had said it with such conviction. My phone buzzed again on top of the envelope. Another message from the group chat. "Chase. The lawyer says we can settle for $3,000 if we pay by Friday. Isla, Mom says you are online. Do not ignore us. This is my livelihood." I closed my eyes. His livelihood. What about mine? I had lost my career, my home, and my sanity to protect his livelihood. I remembered the day I left Helix Point. My boss, Dr. Eris, had looked at me with genuine concern. "Isla," he had said, "you have a gift for seeing patterns in the data that others miss. Do not let the noise drown out the signal." I had missed the pattern in my own life for too long, or maybe I had seen it, but I was too afraid to call it what it was. It was not loyalty. It was not love. It was systemic extraction. The machine beeped, signaling the end of the cycle. The cuff on my bicep tightened, then released. The saline solution rushed into my arm, cold and shocking, waking me up from the days of memory. I was 28 years old. I had a degree in molecular biology, and I was sitting in a strip mall clinic, shivering from the saline, selling my fluids to pay for a brother who was currently texting me demands from an iPhone I had paid for. The nurse walked over to disconnect me. She ripped the tape off my skin, a sharp, stinging pain that made me wince. She wrapped a fresh bandage around the puncture site, bright cobalt blue, the only colorful thing in my gray world. Keep it on for at least 4 hours. She recited the script I knew by heart. Drink plenty of fluids, no heavy lifting. No heavy lifting. I almost laughed. The heaviest thing I carried wasn't physical. I grabbed the envelope and my phone. As I stood up, my knees felt weak, a familiar wave of lightheadedness washing over me. I steadied myself against the chair. "You okay, hun?" the nurse asked, not looking up from her chart. "I am fine," I said. "Just tired." I walked out to the parking lot, the cold November air hitting me like a slap. I climbed into my 10-year-old sedan, the one with the heater that only worked on the highest setting. I sat there for a moment, looking at the payment complete notification on the donor app. $60. It was enough to fill my gas tank. It was enough to buy a week's worth of ramen. It was absolutely not enough to save Chase's bar. I picked up the cream envelope. The paper felt thick, substantial. It felt like weight. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. The sound was loud in the quiet car. Inside was a stack of documents and a heavy business card. I pulled them out, my hands trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from a sudden, intuitive sense that the ground beneath me was about to shift. I turned on the overhead dome light. The text on the card was raised, elegant black ink on ivory. Northbridge Heritage Trust, Marion Lowell. Escrow. Fiduciary Counsel. And underneath that, clamped to the card, was a blue legal folder. The title embossed on the cover seemed to glow in the dim yellow light. Addendum 7C. Bloodline Preservation Provision. I had spent years analyzing biological data, looking for anomalies, for deviations, for the hidden truths in the blood. But as I stared at those words, I realized I was looking at the most significant data point of my life, and I had a feeling that the analysis was going to tear my world apart. I sat in the driver's seat of my 10-year-old sedan, the engine idling with a rhythmic rattle that I had been meaning to fix for 6 months. Outside, the parking lot of the Riverline Plasma Center was bathed in the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. I pulled up the notification on my phone screen. Payment received. $60. I stared at the number until the pixels seemed to blur. $60. That was the price of my plasma, my exhaustion, and my dignity. It was a tank of gas, and maybe 3 days of groceries if I stuck to the generic brands. A bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat, tasting like bile. $60 was exactly what my brother Chase spent on a single round of craft beers for his friends on a Tuesday night. I knew this because I did his bookkeeping. I saw the receipts. I saw the business meeting expenses that were just thinly veiled drinking sessions. I had just sold a part of my own biology to afford what he threw away as a tip. My arm throbbed beneath the thick layer of blue bandage. I felt hollowed out, not just physically, but spiritually. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, and it landed with a dull thud on top of the cream-colored envelope the old man had given me. The envelope. I had almost forgotten about it in the haze of the donation process. I looked at it now. In the dim light of the car, it looked out of place, like a diamond sitting in a gutter. The paper was heavy, textured linen that whispered of old money and closed doors. It was pristine, sharp-cornered, and utterly alien to my world of crumpled receipts and overdue notices. I turned off the car engine to save gas. The sudden silence of the parking lot felt heavy. I picked up the envelope. It had a weight to it, a density that suggested it held more than just paper. I slid a fingernail under the flap. The adhesive gave way with a crisp, satisfying tear. First, I pulled out a business card. It was thick, nearly unbendable. The background was a subtle ivory. The text raised in black ink. Northbridge Heritage Trust, Marion Lowell, Esquire Fiduciary Counsel. The name Northbridge sounded vaguely familiar, ringing a bell in the deep recesses of my memory, but I could not place it. It sounded like a bank, or a private school, or one of those gated communities where the security guards knew your license plate number. I reached back into the envelope and pulled out the main document. It was a slender sheaf of papers bound in a dark blue legal folder. The cover was heavy cardstock, and embossed into the center, in silver foil that caught the orange street lamp light, were the words, Addendum 7C, Bloodline Preservation Provision. I frowned. The title sounded archaic, almost medieval. It sounded like something from a history book about royal succession, not a legal document in the 21st century. I opened the folder. The interior was filled with dense, single-spaced legal text. As a data analyst, I was used to parsing complex information, but this was a different language entirely. It was the language of absolute power. I scanned the first page. It was full of definitions: primary beneficiaries, secondary beneficiaries, discretionary allocations, asset liquidity events. My eyes skipped down, looking for something that made sense. I found a paragraph halfway down the second page that had been highlighted with a faint, yellow marker. The ink looked fresh, as if someone had highlighted it only an hour ago. I squinted to read the text. Clause 4. In the event that a tertiary heir is identified as living below the poverty threshold as defined by the federal index, or is found to be under immediate financial duress, necessitating the sale of biological material, including but not limited to whole blood, plasma, marrow, or reproductive tissue for the purpose of basic survival, the following emergency protocols shall be immediately engaged. My breath hitched. The sale of biological material. I read on, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. Upon verification of such a biological liquidation event, the tertiary heir shall be granted temporary, unilateral executive authority over all discretionary allocations within the trust for a period of 24 hours. This authority supersedes the rights of all primary and secondary beneficiaries to access non-essential funds. I read the sentence 3 times. Unilateral executive authority supersedes rights. I flipped the page, my fingers trembling. The document was getting more specific. It was not a boilerplate contract. It was a weapon. At the bottom of the 3rd page, the printed text ended. Below it, there was a line for a name, labeled Tertiary Heir. In the blank space, someone had written in a sharp, jagged, but immensely powerful cursive, Isla Elise Cooper. I stared at my own name. It looked strange in that handwriting, authoritative, undeniable. And below that, on the line labeled Trust Chairman, was a signature that stopped my heart cold. Victor Cooper. The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Victor. Grandpa Victor. The stories came rushing back, a tidal wave of bitter warnings and hushed insults that had made up the background noise of my childhood. My mother rarely spoke his name without a sneer. He is a monster. Isla, she would say, usually after a glass of wine. He cared more about his stocks than his own son. He cut your father off without a penny because Dad wanted to be an artist instead of a suit. We do not need him. We never needed him. I remembered the narrative clearly. We were the noble outcasts, the Coopers who chose love over money. Victor was the villain in the high tower, the miser who let his grandchildren struggle while he sat on a pile of gold. But then, a different memory surfaced, a sharp, visceral flash of something I had not thought about in years. I was in college, maybe 19 years old. I was home for the summer, checking the mail. I had pulled out a heavy cream-colored envelope, exactly like the one sitting in my lap right now. It had the same Northbridge logo in the corner. I remembered the feel of the expensive paper. I had started to open it, curious. My mother had snatched it out of my hand. I remembered the speed of her movement, the sudden violence in her grip. "Do not touch that." "Isla," she had snapped. "What is it?" I had asked, startled. "It is spam," she had said, her voice tight. "Legal spam. They try to trick you into signing things. Scams. Just garbage." She had torn the envelope in half, right there in the driveway. She tore it into quarters, then eighths, until it was just confetti. She marched to the trash can and threw it in, burying it under a bag of kitchen waste. "Never open mail from them," she had told me, her eyes wide and intense. "Promise me. They just want to hurt your father." I had promised. I trusted her. Why would my mother lie? I looked down at the logo on the business card again. Northbridge Heritage Trust. It was the same logo. The realization washed over me, cold and paralyzing. They were not scams. They were not spam. They were letters from a grandfather I had been told was a monster, and my parents had been intercepting them. For how long? 10 years? 20? I looked back at the document, at the highlighted clause, verification of a biological liquidation event. My eyes moved to the very bottom of the page, to a section printed in a font so small I had to bring the paper inches from my face to read it. Activation trigger. Verified biological donation event. Whole blood or plasma conducted under financial duress on the date of November 20th. November 20th, today. The air in the car felt suddenly thin. I gasped, struggling to fill my lungs. This was not a coincidence. This was a setup. The old man in the waiting room, the way he looked at my arm, the way he asked, "How much have you bled for them already?" It was him. It was Victor Cooper. He had been there. He had sat in that urine-smelling waiting room, in his bespoke suit, watching his granddaughter sell her blood for $60. Why? The question screamed in my mind. If he was so rich, if he controlled this massive trust, why watch me humiliate myself? Why let the needle go in? Why wait until the bag was full of my yellow plasma before handing me the envelope? I flipped the page again. There was a handwritten note on the back of the last sheet, the same sharp, jagged script. "I could not intervene until you proved you were the one paying the price. The bloodline provision is a defense mechanism. Isla. It only unlocks when the system detects that the host is being drained to the point of necrosis. You had to bleed to turn the key." I dropped the folder. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely feel my fingertips. It was a test. A cruel, necessary, terrifying test. He needed proof. He needed legal proof that I was the one keeping the family alive, literally and metaphorically. And he needed me to hit rock bottom to get it. I looked out the window at the plasma center. The neon sign buzzed, "Cash for plasma." My mother's text from earlier that morning played in my head. "Maybe donate blood a few more times. You are young. You can take it." She had sent me here. She had pushed me to this edge, and by doing so, she had unwittingly walked right into a trap set by the father-in-law she despised. I looked at the document again. Temporary unilateral executive authority, for a period of 24 hours. I checked the timestamp on the bottom of the page. It was stamped with a digital code. Activation time, 16:45. It was currently 5:15. I had power. For the next 23 and a half hours, I had absolute control over the money my family had been living on. The money I thought didn't exist. The money they claimed they never received. Wait, I grabbed the business card again. Fiduciary counsel. If there was a trust, and if my parents were secondary beneficiaries, that meant they had been receiving money. My mind raced back to the inconsistencies. The new truck for the bar, the renovations on the house that never seemed to end, the way Chase could always afford a vacation when things got too stressful, even when the bar was supposedly bankrupt. They told me they were broke. They told me they needed my help. They took my salary. They took my savings. They took my blood. But if this trust existed, a wave of nausea rolled over me. It wasn't just that they were bad with money. It was that they were lying. They were draining the trust and draining me. I was just another revenue stream. I was the backup generator they ran into the ground while the main power line was still working perfectly fine. I looked at the bandage on my arm. The blue wrap was tight, cutting off circulation slightly. Lanne, cháu không phải là người bị rút máu đâu. This time, you are not the one who is going to be drained. The old man's words echoed in the small car. He knew. He had watched the whole thing. He had watched for years, and he had finally stepped in, not with a hug, not with a check, but with a weapon. He had handed me a loaded gun and pointed it at my family. I picked up my phone. I had 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 texts from Chase. Chase Isla. Seriously, the lawyer needs the retainer by morning. Transfer what you have. I looked at the message. Then I looked at the signature on the document. Victor Cooper. I felt a shift inside me. It was a cold, hard click, like a lock snapping shut. The shame I had felt staring at the $60 notification evaporated. In its place was something else, something dangerous. It was the cold, clinical detachment I used to feel in the lab when I isolated a virus. I was not a daughter anymore. I was not a sister. I was a tertiary heir, and I had 23 hours and 30 minutes to understand exactly what that meant. I put the car in gear. The engine rattled, a sound of poverty and neglect. But as I pulled out of the parking lot, clutching the blue folder, I didn't feel poor. I felt like the person holding the scalpel. I drove toward the exit, leaving the plasma center behind. I needed answers, and according to the business card, Marion Lowell's office was in the financial district, open late for emergency fiduciary consultations. I looked at my eyes in the rearview mirror. They were red-rimmed and tired, but the pupils were sharp. "Okay, Grandpa," I whispered to the empty car. "Let us see what you gave me." I merged onto the highway, the cream envelope resting on the passenger seat like a silent passenger. The game had changed. The ATM was out of order, and the bank manager had just handed me the keys to the vault. I unlocked the door to my apartment at Silverline Lofts and stepped into the stale, overheated air of the hallway. It was a studio, barely 500 square feet, with a view of a dumpster and a radiator that clanked like a dying engine. My family liked to call it the penthouse because it was on the 4th floor and had a dishwasher. To them, a dishwasher was a sign of opulence. To me, it was just a machine I never used because I could not afford the detergent pods. I tossed my keys on the laminate counter and pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen was a wall of notifications. 69 unread messages in the group chat titled, Team Cooper. I slumped onto my second-hand sofa, keeping my bandaged arm elevated, and opened the app. The conversation had been raging for the last 2 hours while I was sitting in the donor chair, letting a machine filter my blood for gas money. It started with a photo. My mother had reposted a picture I had put on my story a week ago, a simple shot of my kitchen counter with a bowl of apples. I had been trying to make the place look homey. Mom. Look at how clean Isla's place is. Must be nice to have all that time to organize. Dunt Aunt Nora says she is proud of our girl. Below it, the vultures had descended. Chase, look at that backsplash. That is quartz. I priced that out for the bar renovation last year. That is $50 a square foot. She is crying poor, but she is living in a showroom. My stomach twisted. The backsplash was cheap peel-and-stick vinyl I had bought at a dollar store to cover a stain on the wall. But Chase saw what he wanted to see. He saw money. Cousin Becky Isla always figures it out. She never says no. She probably has a savings account she does not tell you guys about. You know how she is with data. She calculates everything. Chase. Exactly. She is hiding it. I am over here trying to keep a family business alive for her nephews, and she is buying quartz. I scrolled down, watching the narrative build. In their minds, I was a miser, sitting on a dragon's hoard of gold, refusing to toss a coin to the starving villagers. The reality was that I was eating peanut butter from a jar because bread was too expensive this week. Then came the private message from Mom. It had come in 20 minutes ago. Mom, honey. Chase is in a bit of a bind. The lawsuit is real. The supplier wants settlement money or they are going to court. Your father and I are tapped out. We gave him the last of the retirement fund last month, but you are in that nice place, so I know you are doing okay. We are going to drive up this weekend to visit. It has been too long. We can have a nice family talk." I stared at the words, family talk. That was code. It meant an intervention where I sat in a chair while 3 adults explained to me why my bank account was actually community property. Then came the follow-up text, the one that made the bile rise in my throat. Mom, don't worry about the money. Sweetie, if cash is tight, maybe you can do that donation thing a few more times. You are always the strongest one in the family. You are young. You can take it. It is just a little needle. Right, I'll love you. I dropped the phone on the cushion next to me. You are young. You can take it. It was a joke to her. A quirky little side hustle. She did not see the dizziness, the bruising, the exhaustion that went bone deep. She saw my body as a renewable resource. I was a battery they could plug into whenever their own charge ran low. And when I was drained, they just told me to recharge faster. I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked over to the kitchen table where I had left my laptop. I needed to see something. The old man's words from the waiting room were echoing in my head. You were the top analyst at Helix Point. I opened my laptop and logged into my old email archive. I had saved everything before I resigned. I searched for the separation agreement and the initial employment contract. I remembered my parents had been so involved when I got that job. Dad had insisted on reviewing the contract with his friend who was a paralegal. They had given me so much advice. I found the document. It was a stock option grant from 3 years ago. I read the fine print. The part I had glossed over because I was 25 and trusted my parents implicitly. Clause 19, familial beneficiary designation. I read it slowly. At the time, Dad had told me it was a standard protection clause. Just in case something happens to you, Isla, we want to make sure the assets stay in the family. But looking at it now, with the eyes of someone who had just been handed a fiduciary weapon, I saw it for what it was. It structured my stock options so that they were not fully liquid to me until 5 years of vesting. And this was the kicker, they could be borrowed against by the designated beneficiaries in the event of a familial hardship request approved by the employee. I checked the transaction history. There were no withdrawals. Thankfully, because I had quit before the stocks fully vested, but the intent was there. They had rigged my job contract before I had even started my first day. They had built a back door into my career. I slammed the laptop shut. The betrayal felt cold and slimy, like touching a dead fish. I looked at the cream envelope and the blue folder lying on the table. Addendum 7C. I sat down and opened the folder again. I flipped past the first page, past the legal definitions, and found the financial appendix at the back. It was a ledger, a detailed history of disbursements from the Northbridge Heritage Trust over the last 15 years. I ran my finger down the column labeled Recipient, Leon Cooper, Chase Cooper, Amy Cooper, Leon Cooper. The list went on and on. I looked at the dates. March, 2010, $10,000. Note, emergency home repair. That was the year the roof leaked. I remembered that. I had paid $4,000 for that roof out of my babysitting money and student loans. Dad had told me they had no money. They took $10,000 from the trust, and I still paid for the roof. June, 2012, $15,000. Note, educational support. Chase Cooper. That was the year Chase dropped out of college to start his DJ career. I paid for his textbooks that semester. August, 2018, $40,000. Note, small business liquidity injection. Chase's Bar Grill, $40,000. I had co-signed a loan for the bar that year because Chase said the bank wouldn't give him enough. He had $40,000 of free money, and he still needed me to put my credit score on the line. I felt a scream building in my chest, but it wouldn't come out. It was stuck behind a wall of pure, unadulterated shock. They hadn't been cut off. The story about Grandpa Victor abandoning us because Dad wanted to be an artist, it was a lie. It was a complete fabrication. Grandpa Victor had been paying them for 15 years. He had been writing checks. I looked at the totals at the bottom of the page. Total discretionary disbursements to Leon Cooper branch, $642,000. $642,000. I looked at the timestamp on my donation app. $60. I had sold my blood for $60 while my father and brother had burned through over $500,000 of family money. And they still wanted $5,000 for a lawsuit. I looked at the notes column again. Medical emergency, business rescue, childcare support. Every single time I had stepped in to save them, every time I had paid a bill, bought groceries, covered rent, they had already been paid for it. They were double dipping. They were taking money from the trust to solve a problem, spending it on God knows what, and then coming to me crying poverty so I would solve the problem with my own money. I was not just a safety net, I was a laundering scheme. They were laundering their own incompetence through my empathy. I flipped to the section for Isla Cooper. It was blank. There was not a single entry. No tuition support, no medical support, nothing. A handwritten note in the margin. In that same sharp script from Victor funds intercepted by guardians. Direct access blocked by Amy Cooper. Claiming beneficiary refusal. Mom. Mom had told the trust I refused the money. Spam legal crap. She had called it. She had torn up the checks. Or maybe she hadn't torn them up. Maybe she had forged my signature. Or maybe she just told them I didn't want it, so the trust would divert the allocation back to the general family pot, which meant Dad and Chase. I reached for my phone and opened the voicemail tab. I needed to hear her voice. I needed to reconcile the monster on this paper with the woman who baked pumpkin bread. I played the message from yesterday. Isla, my beloved daughter, just calling to check in. Also, Chase is really stressed about the taxes. I know you are busy, but if you could just take a look at them, you are so smart with numbers. We would be lost without you. Literally lost. Love you to the moon. Beloved daughter. Smart with numbers. Love you. The words sounded different now. They didn't sound like affection. They sounded like the anesthetic they put on your skin before they insert the needle. It was just a numbing agent to make the extraction easier. We would be lost without you. Translation. We would have to spend our own money without you. I looked at my arm. The blue bandage was a stark reminder of reality. I had literally drained myself for them. And tomorrow, they were coming here. They were coming to this apartment to ask for more, to ask me to bleed again. The anger that finally broke through wasn't hot or fiery. It was cold. It was the temperature of liquid nitrogen. It was the kind of cold that burns. I wasn't going to let them in. I wasn't going to cook for them. I wasn't going to look at Chase's taxes. I looked at the Addendum 7C document again. Temporary unilateral executive authority. I had the power to stop it. I could turn off the tap, but doing so would be an act of war. It would destroy the illusion of Team Cooper forever. My phone buzzed in my hand, startling me. It wasn't a text this time. It was a call. The screen showed a number I didn't recognize. No caller ID, just a local area code. My thumb hovered over the decline button. I never answered unknown numbers. It was usually bill collectors, but then I looked at the business card on the table. Marion Lowell. I swiped right and held the phone to my ear. I didn't say anything. Ms. Cooper, a woman's voice said. It was crisp, professional, and utterly devoid of warmth. It sounded like steel wrapped in velvet. This is Marion Lowell from the Northbridge Heritage Trust. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I am listening. I assume by now you have read Addendum 7C, she said. It wasn't a question. And I assume you have looked at the financial appendix. I have, I said, my voice rasping slightly. Good, Marion said. Then you understand the situation. The activation trigger was logged at 4:45 this afternoon when you signed the consent form at Riverline Plasma. The 24-hour clock is ticking. Ms. Cooper? He was there, I said, my eyes stinging. He watched me. Mr. Victor Cooper believes in empirical evidence, Marion replied, her tone unbothered. He needed to be sure that you were truly the host organism being depleted, and not a co-conspirator in the waste. I am not a co-conspirator, I whispered, looking at the ledger that proved my stupidity. I am the fool. A fool is someone who doesn't know they are being used, Marion said. You know now. The question is, What are you going to do about it? I gripped the phone tighter. What are my options? We can discuss that in person, she said, but I need to know if you are ready to have that conversation, because once you start this process, you cannot go back to being the dutiful daughter. You will be the villain. I looked at the photo of my kitchen on the group chat. I looked at Chase's comment about the quartz backsplash. I looked at the blue bandage on my arm. I am already the villain, I said, my voice steadying. They just haven't told me to my face yet. Excellent, Marion said. There is a car waiting downstairs. We have a lot of paperwork to go through before your family arrives this weekend. I suggest you bring the envelope. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. I stood up and walked to the window. Down on the street, a sleek black sedan was idling double-parked in front of my building. It looked like a shark swimming in a pond of minnows. I grabbed the cream envelope. I grabbed the blue folder. I didn't grab my coat. I didn't grab my purse. I just took the evidence of my family's betrayal and the weapon my grandfather had given me. I walked to the door, and for the first time in 10 years, I didn't check the group chat. I let the 69 messages sit there, unread. I had a different team now. The speakerphone on my kitchen counter was the loudest thing in the room. Marion Lowell's voice was not shouting, but it filled the cramped space of my studio apartment with a terrifying, resonant clarity. It was the voice of a woman who billed by the minute and never wasted a second. The provision was triggered at 4 o'clock this afternoon, Marion said. Precisely when the needle entered your arm and the digital signature on the consent form hit the Riverline server. We have been monitoring for a biological liquidation event for 18 months. Ms. Cooper, we just needed a confirmed hit. I paced the length of my kitchen, which took exactly 4 steps. My phone was buzzing incessantly on the counter next to the open blue folder, vibrating against the laminate like a trapped insect. I ignored it. My eyes were glued to my laptop screen, where Marion had instructed me to open a secure link sent to my email. Monitoring, I asked, my voice sounding thin and reedy compared to hers. You make it sound like I am a lab rat. In a way, you were, Marion replied coolly. But you were a lab rat in a maze designed by your parents. We were simply the observers waiting to see if you would find the exit. On my laptop screen, a document loaded. It was a scan of a physical letter. I leaned in, the blue light washing over my tired face. It was an envelope addressed to me, dated 3 years ago. The address was my old apartment in Cambridge. Across the front, in red ink, was a stamp, "Return to sender. Refused." I never refused this, I whispered. I never even saw this. Scroll down, Marion commanded. The next image made the hair on my arms stand up. It was a high-resolution photo of the contents of a trash can. It looked like it had been taken with a telephoto lens. Inside the bin, resting on top of a pile of coffee grounds and eggshells, was a Northbridge Heritage Trust envelope, torn into ragged quarters. Your mother has a very predictable routine, Marion said, her tone clinical. She intercepts the mail. She destroys the correspondence. And then she calls the trust administrator, usually your father does the talking, actually, and claims that you are too proud to accept assistance, or that you are doing so well that you want your share reallocated to the general family fund to help with the business. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the pint of plasma I had just lost. Reallocated. Click the next tab, Marion said. Let us look at the forensics. The screen changed. It was a spreadsheet, but it was visualized like a crime scene map. On the left were the requests submitted by Leon and Amy Cooper. On the right were the actual expenditures. I read the first line. Request date, February 14th, 2022. Stated purpose, emergency dental surgery for Isla Cooper. Implant and reconstruction. Amount requested, $8,000. I touched my teeth. I had never had dental surgery. I still had a chipped molar from college because I could not afford a crown. Actual expenditure. The line connected to a credit card charge at a resort in Cabo San Lucas, the Sapphire Bay Resort Spa. Couples retreat package. They went to Mexico, I said. my voice trembling. I remember that. They told me they won a contest from the local radio station. There was no contest, Marion said. There was only your phantom teeth. I read the next one. Request date September 10th, 2023. Stated purpose legal retainer for Isla Cooper. Employment dispute defense. Amount requested $12,000. I never had an employment dispute, I said. I quit Helix Point voluntarily. I walked away. Actual expenditure. A wire transfer to Soundwave Pro Audio. Chase's speakers, I realized. The new sound system for the bar. He told everyone he got a small business grant. The grant was you, Marion corrected. Or rather, the fiction of you. The spreadsheet went on and on. Tuition for a master's degree I never applied for. Medical treatments for a mysterious autoimmune condition I did not have. Down payments on cars. Renovations for accessibility needs, for a house that had no disabled residents. It was a masterpiece of fraud. And the victim was not just the trust. The victim was my reality. They had painted a portrait of me to my grandfather, a portrait of a sickly, litigious, incompetent disaster of a granddaughter who constantly needed saving so they could pocket the rescue money. Why? I asked, gripping the edge of the counter. Why did Grandpa Victor let this happen if he knew, if he was watching? Why did he sign the checks? Because legally, he had to. Marion explained. The original terms of the trust were loose. Discretionary funds for family welfare are hard to police without a plaintiff. And you, Ms. Cooper, were silent. You never complained. You never reached out. As far as the official record showed, you were receiving the help and asking for more. I did not know, I snapped. Ignorance is not a defense in a court of law, and it is not a defense in a family dynamic, Marion said sharply. However, Victor suspected he is a man who built an empire on reading people. He did not believe that the woman who published 3 papers on protein synthesis before the age of 25 was also a woman who needed $12,000 to fight a parking ticket. So he wrote the bloodline provision, I said, looking at the blue folder. He needed a trigger, Marion said. He needed absolute, irrefutable proof that the flow of resources was inverted. A healthy family structure flows from the top down. Parents provide for children. The rich provide for the struggling. In your family, the flow is reversed. The child provides for the parents. The struggling provider supports the idle consumers. She paused, and the silence on the line was heavy. The provision requires a biological marker, she continued. It is medieval, perhaps, but effective, when the tertiary heir, that is you, is forced to sell their own body to survive, while the primary beneficiaries, your parents and brother, are still drawing discretionary funds. The breach of fiduciary duty is proven. Your plasma donation today was the smoking gun. My phone buzzed again. I looked down. A text from Mom. Mom. Just booked the flights. We land at 10 tomorrow. Chase is so excited to see you. He says he misses his big sis. We are a family. Isla, we stick together. Get some rest. The contrast between the text and the spreadsheet on my screen was so violent it made me dizzy. We stick together, like leeches stick to a host. So what happens now? I asked Marion. I have the power. What does that mean? It means you have a button, Marion said. And you have until 11:59 tonight to push it. If you sign the execution order attached to the email I just sent, we freeze them out. Freeze them. A total suspension of all discretionary allocations to the Leon Cooper branch, Marion said, her voice devoid of pity. No more emergency requests, no more business investments, no more medical rescue funds without direct provider billing. We cut the line. The monthly basic stipend remains. Victor is not a murderer, but the party is over. The bar gets no bailout, the house gets no new deck, and your brother's lawsuit. He pays for it himself. I swallowed hard. If I sign this, they will know. Oh, they will know immediately, Marion said. Their cards will be declined at breakfast. The wire transfer for the lawsuit will bounce, and they will receive a formal notification that the freeze was initiated by the tertiary heir under the bloodline provision. They will hate me, I said. The realization washed over me like ice water. They will say I am destroying the family. They will say I am selfish. They will, Marion agreed. They will call you ungrateful. They will call you a traitor. They will tell everyone who will listen that you have stolen their birthright. You will be the villain in every story they tell for the next 20 years. I looked at the bandaged spot on my arm. It throbbed in time with my heartbeat. And if I do not sign, I asked. Then at midnight, the provision expires. Marion said, the trust returns to its standard operating procedure. Your parents will continue to draw funds in your name. Chase will likely get his $5,000 by Monday, probably claiming it is for your rehabilitation, and you will wake up tomorrow, go to the grocery store, and calculate whether you can afford the name-brand peanut butter. She let that sink in. And, she added, the next time you go to Riverline Plasma, Victor will not be in the waiting room. He does not offer the lifeboat twice. I closed my eyes. I could see the future if I did nothing. It was a long, gray tunnel of Isla. Can you just... And Isla. We promise this is the last time. It was a future where I slowly dissolved, cell by cell, until there was nothing left of me but a dried-up husk that they would step over to get to the next host. Victor is flying in tonight, Marion said, breaking my reverie. He will be at the Northbridge Foundation headquarters tomorrow at 3 o'clock. He wants to know if you have the stomach to look him in the eye, and more importantly, if you have the stomach to look your father in the eye and say no. Tomorrow, I repeated. My family is coming tomorrow. Then the timing is perfect, Marion said. A confrontation is inevitable. The only question is whether you walk into it armed or whether you walk into it on your knees. I looked at the screen again. $642,000. I looked at the notification from the Plasma app. $60. The math was simple. It was brutal, but it was simple. Ms. Lowell, I said, what happens to the money that they would have requested if I freeze it? It stays in the principal, she said. It grows. Or if the tertiary heir designates, it can be redirected to protected trusts for minors, specifically grandchildren, Chase's kids, Leo and Sam. I thought about my nephews. I thought about them growing up in a house where work was something other people did, and money was something you manipulated out of relatives. I thought about them watching Chase panic every month, learning that anxiety was a lifestyle. If I do not turn off the valve, I whispered. Who will? No one, Marion said. The valve stays open until the reservoir is dry, and you are the reservoir. Ms. Cooper. My hand hovered over the mouse. The cursor was blinking over the link labeled Execute Order A. Isla, Marion said, and for the first time, her voice softened, just a fraction. You have spent 10 years trying to save them by giving them what they wanted. Has it worked? I looked around my apartment, the peeling vinyl backsplash, the radiator that didn't work, the empty refrigerator. No, I said, it has not. Then perhaps it is time to try saving them by stopping, she said. I will stay on the line while you read the document, but remember the time. You have 6 hours. I sat down at the table. The cheap laminate felt cold under my elbows. I pulled the cream envelope closer to me, running my thumb over the raised ink of the Northbridge logo. My mother's text message lit up the phone screen again. Mom, are you ignoring us? Honey, Chase is really worried. Just text us back so we know you are okay. We love you. I looked at the word love. It looked like a hook bait. I picked up the phone and turned it face down. I am reading it now, I said to Marion. I wasn't reading a legal document. I was reading my own Emancipation Proclamation. And the ink was going to be expensive. It was going to cost me my family. But as I looked at the blue bandage on my arm, I realized I had already paid for this. I had paid for it in plasma, in sleepless nights, in panic attacks in the lab supply closet. I had bought this moment, and I was going to use it. The morning light filtering into my studio apartment was gray and unforgiving, the kind of flat, sunless illumination that exposes every dust mote and every crack in the plaster. I did not pace. I did not clean. For the first time in my life, I did not frantically scrub the counters or rearrange the throw pillows to make my life look more put together than it was. My mother had texted me at 7 in the morning with a suggestion that I hit the early bird special at the donation center before they arrived. She used a winking emoji. She said it would be good to have a buffer for the weekend expenses. I did not reply. Instead, I put on my heaviest winter coat, a thick wool trench that I had bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. I put on my boots. I slipped the Northbridge business card and the cream envelope into my deep pocket. And then I sat on the edge of my unmade bed and waited. I knew their rhythm. I knew that if they said 10 o'clock, they meant noon. I knew they would stop for coffee, get into an argument about the GPS, and arrive flustered and demanding, expecting me to soothe the chaos they had created. At 11:58, the intercom on the wall buzzed. It was a harsh, electronic rasp that used to make my stomach clench with anxiety. Today, it just sounded like a noise. I pressed the talk button. Isla, honey. My mother's voice was distorted by the cheap speaker, but the manic cheerfulness bled through the static. Buzz us up. It is freezing out here. I brought pumpkin bread. The boys are so excited to see their Auntie Isla. I leaned into the microphone, my voice steady. I will come down to the lobby. The building does not allow guests upstairs without prior registration. It was a lie. The concierge at Silverline Lofts did not care who went up as long as they didn't set the building on fire, but I was done letting them into my sanctuary. My apartment was small, but it was the only place on earth where I wasn't bleeding. I wasn't going to let the infection cross the threshold. What? Mom's voice dropped an octave. Do not be silly. We have luggage. Just buzz us in. I am coming down, I said, and released the button before she could argue. I took the elevator down 4 floors. The metal doors reflected my image back to me pale, dark circles under my eyes, but standing straighter than I had in years. The lobby of Silverline Lofts was an exercise in budget luxury. There were fake fiddle-leaf fig trees in the corners, a geometric rug that was already fraying at the edges, and a concierge desk manned by a college student named Dave who was currently watching videos on his phone with one earbud in. The automatic doors slid open, and the Cooper family poured in like a weather event. Mom was first, clutching a Tupperware container wrapped in foil. She was wearing a coat that looked new, a puffy, expensive brand with fur on the hood. Dad was behind her, dragging 2 oversized rolling suitcases that thumped loudly over the threshold. Chase brought up the rear, holding his iPad like a shield, while my 2 nephews, Leo and Sam, squeezed past him, wrestling over a Nintendo Switch. Isla, Mom shrieked, dropping the pumpkin bread on a side table and rushing toward me with her arms wide open. Oh, look at you. You look so thin. Have you been eating? She lunged for the hug. Usually, I would melt into it. Usually, I would let the smell of her perfume vanilla and expensive hairspray lull me into thinking everything was okay. This time, I stood rigid. I kept my hands in my pockets. I did not lean in. Mom's arms wrapped around me, but she was hugging a statue. She squeezed, waiting for the reciprocal pressure, the submission. When it didn't come, she patted my back awkwardly twice, thump, thump, and pulled away. The silence that followed was short, but sharp. Dad stopped dragging the suitcase. Chase looked up from his iPad. Even the kids seemed to sense the shift in barometric pressure and went quiet. Well, Mom said, her smile faltering, and then fixing itself into a tighter, harder line. Someone woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Hello, Mom, I said. Hello, Dad. Chase. Why are we standing in the lobby? Chase asked. He didn't say hello. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the fake marble floors and the high ceilings. This place is decent. Better than the dump you sent us pictures of. How much is rent here? $2,300. He wasn't admiring it. He was auditing it. I could see the calculator running behind his eyes. If she can afford this, she can afford me. We are not going up, I said, my voice carrying in the echoey space. Dave the concierge looked up, sensing drama, and paused his video. If we are going to talk, We are going to do it here, or we are not going to do it at all. Mom laughed, a high, nervous sound. Isla, do not be ridiculous. We drove 3 hours. Your father needs to use the bathroom. The boys want to watch cartoons. We are family. This is our home too when we visit. It is not, I said. I pay the rent. I am on the lease. It is my home. And today, it is closed. Mom's face changed. The sweet, doting mask slipped, revealing the irritation underneath. What is this little power trip? Are you embarrassed of us? Or are you hiding something up there? A boyfriend. Is it money? Chase cut in. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. He smelled of stale coffee and aggression. Did you sell some stock? Or did you go to the center this morning like Mom said? Is that where the rent money came from? He looked at my arm, searching for the bandage beneath my coat sleeve. He was looking for the receipt of his own inheritance. I did not go to the center, I said. Then we have a problem, Chase said, his voice dropping to a hiss, because I need $38,000 by Monday. Isla, or I lose the lease on the new expansion space. There it was. The number, 38,000. Expansion space, I asked, feigning ignorance. I thought the bar was failing. It is a pivot, Chase snapped. We are pivoting to a lounge concept. I signed the lease 2 months ago. The penalty for breaking it is 38,000. I thought I could float it, but the loan fell through. So you signed a contract you could not afford, I said. I signed it because I thought I had backing, Chase yelled. Dad said we could move some things around. Mom said you would help with the bridge loan. We had a plan. Isla. The plan was me, I said. The plan is always me. Specifically, the plan is for me to sell my car, empty my 401k, and bleed myself dry so you can open a lounge. You do not need that car, Mom interjected, her voice reasonable, as if she were explaining gravity. You work from home now, and you are young. You can rebuild your retirement. Chase has children. He is building a legacy for your nephews. I looked at Leo and Sam. They had abandoned the switch and were pressing their noses against the glass of the front door. Looking at a dog walking by outside, they were oblivious. They were just the currency Chase used to buy my guilt. I know, I said softly. Good, Dad said, speaking for the first time. He looked relieved. He wiped sweat from his forehead. So let us go upstairs, look at the numbers, and figure this out. We can call the bank together. I know about the trust, I said. The words were quiet, but they hit the group like a grenade. Dad dropped the handle of the suitcase. It clattered loudly against the tile floor. Mom blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. What? I know about the Northbridge Heritage Trust, I repeated, looking directly at my father. I know about the $642,000 you have withdrawn over the last 15 years. I know about the money for the roof, the money for the tuition, the money for the dental surgery I never had. The color drained from Dad's face so fast I thought he might faint. He looked at Mom, panic swimming in his eyes. Mom recovered faster. She scoffed, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. I do not know what you are talking about. That is just something your grandfather made up. It is complicated. You do not understand finance, Isla. I was a data analyst for a Fortune 500 company, I said coldly. I understand ledgers, I understand fraud, and I understand that you have been intercepting my mail for a decade. Chase looked between us, confused. He obviously didn't know the full extent. He knew there was money, but he didn't know I wasn't supposed to be paying for everything. What trust? What is she talking about, Dad? She is delusional, Mom snapped, her voice getting shrill. She is having a breakdown. It is the stress. Isla, honey, you are not making sense. We have always struggled. We have always been alone. I have the spreadsheet. Mom, I said. I have the receipts. The vacation in Cabo. The one you won on the radio. That was paid for with a withdrawal request for my emergency dental work. Mom's face went from pale to a blotchy red. We needed a break. We were drowning. You were doing fine. You had that big job. You did not need it. So you stole it, I said. We did not steal it, she screamed. And now Dave the concierge was standing up, looking ready to call security. It is family money. It belongs to all of us. Your grandfather is a miserly old hateful man who tried to control us. I was protecting you from him. By robbing me? I asked. Chase stepped in again, but the arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, cornered animal look. Wait. If there is a trust, why am I being sued for $38,000? Why are we broke? Because you spent it all. Chase? I said. You spent it on speakers. You spent it on trucks. You spent it on business meetings that were just hangovers waiting to happen. I took a step closer to my brother. And while we are talking about fraud, I have a question about the original loan for the bar, the one from 4 years ago. Chase flinched. He physically recoiled. Did you use my social security number to co-sign that loan? I asked. Because on my credit report, there is an inquiry I never authorized, and Marion Lowell seems to think that is a federal crime. It was just a signature, Mom yelled, stepping between us. It was just a formality. You have good credit. Your brother needed a start. How can you be so petty about a number? He is your brother. Petty. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You committed identity theft. You have been embezzling my inheritance and then guilt-tripping me into covering the gaps you created. We did it for the family, Dad shouted. It was the loudest I had ever heard him speak. We did it to survive. You do not know what it is like. Isla, you have always had it easy. Things come easy to you. I looked at them. I looked at the expensive coat my mother was wearing, bought with money that should have paid for my education. I looked at the iPad in Chase's hand. I looked at the suitcases packed for a long stay in my tiny apartment. Easy, I said. I was bleeding into a bag yesterday for $60. I was sitting in a room with meth addicts so I could pay the gas bill you stuck me with. That is your choice, Mom spat. You like being the martyr. You like making us feel bad. I looked over at the corner. Leo and Sam were sitting on the floor now. Leo had opened the container of pumpkin bread and was eating a piece, watching us with wide, fearful eyes. He looked exactly like Chase did when we were kids, before the entitlement set in, before he was ruined by the constant cushioning of his failures. I wasn't going to let them turn those boys into Chase. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the business card. The heavy cream cardstock felt like a weapon in my hand. I held it out to my father. I am done, I said. I am done being the bank. I am done being the insurance policy. And I am done being the daughter you lie to. Dad stared at the card. He didn't take it. Take it, I commanded. He reached out with a shaking hand and took the card. That is the address for the Northbridge Foundation, I said. Marion Lowell is expecting you at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Grandpa Victor will be there too. Victor is dead to us, Mom hissed. We are not going. You are going, I said, because as of midnight last night, I froze the trust. There is no more money coming. The credit cards are dead. The wire transfers are blocked. If you want that $38,000 for the lease, or money for gas to get home, or money to buy dinner tonight, you have to go ask him, not me. You froze it, Chase whispered. You can't do that. I am the tertiary heir, I said, the legal term feeling strange but powerful on my tongue. And I have unilateral executive authority. It is done. I looked at my watch. It is 12:10. You have 3 hours to get to the financial district. I suggest you leave now. Traffic is bad. You are kicking us out, Mom screamed. We drove 3 hours. Where are we supposed to go? I do not know, I said. But you cannot stay here. I turned to the concierge. Dave, these people are leaving. Please ensure they do not go up to the 4th floor. Dave nodded, looking terrified but alert. Yes, ma'am. I turned back to my family one last time. They looked like a painting of a disaster. Dad was gray. Chase was purple with rage. Mom was crying, the black mascara running down her face, ruining the perfect facade. I hate you, Chase said. You are dead to me." "I know," I said. "I have been dead to you for a long time. Chase, I was just a ghost that wrote checks." I walked past them, toward the street exit. I wasn't going back up to my apartment. I couldn't be in the same building as them right now. I needed air. I needed to walk. "Isla," Mom screamed after me. "Isla, come back here. Who is going to watch the boys while we go to the meeting?" I stopped at the door. I looked back at Leo and Sam. "Take them with you," I said. "Let them see how the business is really done. Maybe they will learn something you never did." I pushed through the glass doors and stepped out into the cold wind. I didn't look back. I put my hands in my pockets and started walking. I had a meeting at 3 o'clock too, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be late because I was busy cleaning up someone else's mess. At 2:45 in the afternoon, the Northbridge Foundation building looked less like an office and more like a fortress built to keep the chaos of the world at bay. It was a monolith of black glass and steel, rising out of the financial district pavement like a shard of obsidian. It reflected the gray sky and the rushing traffic, distorting them into something cold and abstract. I stood on the sidewalk, looking up. Yesterday, I had walked into a strip mall clinic with flickering fluorescent lights and a distinct smell of despair. Today, I was walking into a place that smelled of money old, quiet, untouchable money. A man was waiting for me by the revolving doors. It was the same security guard from the plasma center, the large man in the dark suit who had scanned the waiting room while my grandfather watched me bleed. He was wearing sunglasses even though it was overcast. "Ms. Cooper," he said, his voice a deep rumble. He did not ask for ID. He stepped aside and held the door open. "They are expecting you on the 20th floor." I walked into the lobby. The air conditioning was crisp, almost chilly. The floors were polished marble, so shiny I could see the scuff marks on my boots reflected in them. Everything here whispered of precision and control. Two things my life had lacked for a decade. The guard escorted me to a private elevator. There were no buttons, just a keycard reader. He swiped a card, and the doors slid shut with a heavy, expensive hush. We rose in silence. My stomach did a slow roll, but it wasn't the nausea of hunger or blood loss this time. It was the adrenaline of impending collision. The doors opened onto a corridor lined with modern art that probably cost more than the entire debt Chase had racked up in his lifetime. At the end of the hall, double doors of frosted glass stood closed. The guard opened them. The conference room was vast. One wall was entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of the city that made the people down below look like ants. In the center of the room sat a long table made of some dark, polished wood that looked like it had been carved from a single ancient tree. At the head of the table stood Marion Lowell. She looked even sharper in person than she had sounded on the phone. She wore a gray suit that fit her like armor. Her brown hair pulled back so tight it pulled her features into a severe, unreadable mask. Her eyes were cold, metallic, and intelligent. And sitting opposite the door, in a high-backed leather chair, was Victor Cooper. He looked different than he had in the waiting room. There, he had been an observer, an anomaly. Here, he was the center of gravity. He was wearing a three-piece suit of midnight blue, perfectly tailored. The silk scarf was gone, replaced by a crisp white shirt and a dark tie. But the eyes were the same blue-gray, sharp, and currently fixed on me with an intensity that made me want to straighten my spine. "Isla," he said. It was not a question. It was an acknowledgement. "Grandfather," I replied. The word felt strange in my mouth, heavy with 30 years of absence and a lifetime of poisoned stories. "Please, take a seat," Marion said, gesturing to the chair at the opposite end of the table from Victor. "Your family has just cleared security. They will be here in approximately 2 minutes." I sat down. The leather was cool and soft. I placed the cream envelope and the blue folder on the table in front of me. They looked small against the vast expanse of dark wood. "Are you ready?" Victor asked. His voice was low, gravelly. I looked at the bandage on my arm, hidden under my coat sleeve. "I do not know," I admitted, "but I am here." "That is all that matters," he said. The elevator chimed in the hallway. Then came the noise. It started as a murmur, then escalated into the familiar cacophony of the Cooper traveling circus. I heard my mother's voice, high and complaining, asking why the security was so rude. I heard the thump of the rolling suitcases. I heard Chase snapping at Leo to put the game away. The frosted glass doors burst open. Mom marched in first, looking flushed and furious. She was still wearing her fur-hooded coat, clutching her purse like a weapon. Dad followed, looking small and terrified, dragging the luggage. Chase brought up the rear, looking around the room with a mix of defensiveness and greed, holding the hands of my two nephews. "Isla!" Mom shouted the moment she saw me. She ignored the other people in the room. "Who do you think you are, dragging us all over the city? The security downstairs tried to take my nail file. This is ridiculous." She stormed toward me, her heels clicking loudly on the floor. "We are leaving. Right now. You are coming with us. And we are going to figure this out at a diner like normal people. I do not know whose office you borrowed. But, Amy," a voice cut through the air. It wasn't loud, but it stopped her mid-stride. Mom froze. She turned slowly toward the head of the table. Dad dropped the handle of the suitcase again. It hit the floor with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. He stared at the old man in the blue suit. His face went slack, his mouth opening slightly. "Dad," he whispered. It was the voice of a child. A child who had been waiting 30 years for a parent to look at him. Victor Cooper did not smile. He did not stand up to offer a hug. He just sat there, his hands resting on the table, his expression unreadable. "Hello, Leon," Victor said. "You look tired." Dad stammered. He looked at Mom, then back at Victor. I thought you were in Europe, or dead." "Evidently not," Victor said dryly. Mom recovered from her shock, and her defense mechanism kicked in immediately aggression. She stepped in front of Dad, shielding him. "What is this?" she demanded, pointing a manicured finger at Victor. "We do not need you here. We have survived without you for 30 years. We do not want your money, and we certainly do not want your judgment. Come on, Leon, Chase, we are leaving." "You are not leaving," Marion Lowell said. She stepped forward, pressing a button on a console built into the table. The lights in the room dimmed slightly, and a large screen on the wall behind Victor hummed to life. "This is an official session of the Northbridge Heritage Trust. The meeting has been convened by the acting temporary trustee, Ms. Isla Cooper." Chase let out a bark of laughter. It was a nervous, incredulous sound. "Isla?" He looked at me, shaking his head. "Isla is the trustee. She can barely pay her own rent. Is this a joke? Did you hire actors?" "Isla," Mom sneered, crossing her arms. "Acting trustee. That is rich. My daughter is a lab tech, not a banker. Stop playing games. Isla, it is embarrassing." "Sit down," Marion commanded. Her voice had the snap of a whip. To my surprise, they sat, not because they respected her, but because they were bullies, and bullies always fold when they encounter a bigger predator. They took the chairs along the side of the table, huddling together. "Ms. Cooper," Marion said, nodding to me. "The floor is yours." I stood up. My legs felt steady. I looked at my family, my mother's glare, my father's confusion, my brother's smirk. "Marion," I said, "show them the ledger." Marion tapped the console. The screen behind Victor filled with a spreadsheet. It was the same one I had seen on my laptop, but projected 10 feet high. The numbers were inescapable. "This," Marion narrated, using a laser pointer, "is a record of disbursements from the trust to the Leon Cooper family branch over the last 15 years. March 2015, Marion read, tuition assistance for Isla Cooper, master's degree program, $25,000. Chase looked at me. "I thought you didn't get into grad school." "I didn't apply," I said quietly. "But the check was cashed." June 2018, Marion continued. Medical emergency, Isla Cooper, autoimmune treatment protocol, $15,000. I am healthy, I said. I have never had an autoimmune disease. But that was the summer you bought the boat, wasn't it, Dad? Dad shrank into his chair. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. August 2023. Marion read, Small Business Rescue, Chase's Bar and Grill, $40,000. Chase sat up straight. Wait, that was a grant. Dad said he got a grant. It was not a grant, Victor said, his voice cutting in. It was a distribution from my estate, authorized because your father claimed the business was the only thing keeping the family afloat. And yet, Marion noted, 6 months later, the bar was in debt again, and Ms. Cooper, she pointed the laser at me, was taking out a personal loan to cover payroll. Mom stood up, slamming her hand on the table. This is illegal. You cannot show our private finances. We use that money for the family. It all goes into the same pot. Does it? Marion asked. She clicked the remote. The screen changed. The spreadsheet vanished, replaced by a high-resolution photograph. It was the photo of the trash can, the coffee grounds, the eggshells, and the torn cream-colored envelope with the Northbridge logo. The room went dead silent. This was retrieved from the refuse bin outside your home in Cambridge 3 years ago, Marion said. It was a letter addressed to Isla, informing her of her own separate trust fund allocation, an allocation that would have paid for her apartment, her car, her life. I watched my mother's face. I watched the recognition dawn in her eyes, followed immediately by the panic of being caught. Mom stammered. I threw it away because it was a mistake. I didn't want her to be beholden to him. She gestured wildly at Victor. He manipulates people with money. I was protecting her. Victor leaned forward. The motion was small, but it carried the weight of a collapsing building. You call that spam, Amy? He asked. His voice was low, shaking with suppressed rage. I watched my granddaughter sit in a clinic yesterday that smelled of urine and bleach. I watched a nurse stick a 16-gauge needle into her arm to drain half a liter of plasma from her body for $60. He stood up slowly. He was tall, imposing, a giant in the room. That spam you tore up, Victor growled, was the only thing standing between her and that needle. You didn't tear up a letter. You tore up her dignity so you could keep her desperate enough to pay your bills. Mom opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. She looked at Dad for help, but Dad was staring at the table, tears streaming down his face. We didn't know, Chase muttered, looking at the screen. I didn't know about the letters, I swear. But you knew she was paying for you, Marion said. And you were planning on doing it again. She clicked the remote one last time. The screen changed to a screenshot of an email chain. It was dated 2 days ago. The subject line was Strategy for Weekend, from Amy Cooper to Chase Cooper. Text. Do not worry about the lawsuit money. We will go up to Silverline on Saturday. Bring the boys. If she sees Leo and Sam, she will fold. She never says no to the kids. She's weak like that. We just need to cry a little about the legacy. She will find the money. She always does. I read the words on the screen. She is weak like that. I looked at Leo and Sam. They were sitting quietly in the corner, watching the adults scream, clutching their Nintendo Switch like a life raft. They were the ammunition. My mother and brother had loaded them into the gun and pointed them at my heart. Chase turned bright red. He tried to cover the screen with his hand from where he sat. A useless, childish gesture. That is out of context. We just meant she loves the kids. It means you see her love as a weakness to be exploited, Marion said. It establishes premeditation. You plan to use emotional duress to extract funds from a target you knew was already financially comprised. Victor sat back down. He looked at me. His eyes were not angry when they looked at me. They were sad. This is not a misunderstanding, Isla, Victor said softly. This is not a family struggling to get by. This is a parasitic system. It is intentional. It is calculated. And it has been running for 15 years. He gestured to the frozen image of the email on the screen. They have turned you into a resource, he said. They mine you. And when you run dry, they push you to sell your blood to refill the veins so they can mine you again. The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the projector fan and the soft sobbing of my father. The question remains, Victor said, folding his hands on the dark wood. You have seen the data. You have seen the evidence. You have the power to stop it. He looked at the clock on the wall. You have 9 hours left on the provision, he said. Isla, do you decide to stop the bleeding, or do we let them drain you until there is nothing left? I looked at my mother. She wasn't looking at me with love anymore. She was looking at me with fear. She was looking at me like I was a vending machine that had just unplugged itself. I looked at the blue folder under my hand. I felt the cool, smooth surface of the paper. Show me the orders, I said to Marion. Mom gasped. Isla, no. But I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the screen, on the words, she is weak like that. I am not weak, I whispered to myself. Show me the orders, I repeated, louder this time. Marion Lowell reached into her briefcase. The sound of the leather latch snapping open was sharp, like the breaking of a small bone. The room was suffocatingly quiet, filled only with the reverberations of the evidence that had just been displayed on the screen. My mother was pale, her chest heaving with indignant, terrified breaths. My father was staring at his shoes. Chase was looking at the wall, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Marion placed a dark blue leather folder on the table directly in front of me. It was nearly identical to the Addendum 7C folder I had received in the car, but this one was thinner. It felt final. These are the execution orders, Marion said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made the air feel dense. They are drafted pursuant to the authority granted to you by the bloodline preservation provision. They are simple, they are immediate, and they require your signature to become law. She opened the folder. Inside, there were 3 documents. 2 were clipped to the right side, 1 to the left. They were short, half a page of text each, no dense legal jargon, just instructions. Order A, Marion said, pointing to the top document on the right. Discretionary freeze. I read the bold text at the top. Order a immediate suspension of discretionary allocations. Subject, the lineal branch of Leon Cooper. If you sign this, Marion explained, looking at my parents, it initiates a total freeze on all non-essential funding for your father, your mother, your brother, and any commercial entities associated with them, specifically Chase's Bar and Grill. My mother let out a strangled noise, like a gasp caught in a sob. To be clear, Marion continued, her eyes laser-focused on me, this does not cut off the basic living stipend. Your parents will still receive their monthly allowance for food and utilities, provided those utilities are for their primary residence and not a vacation rental, but it terminates everything else. No more emergency bailouts, no more lump sums for business rescues, no more tuition for classes that are never attended, no more medical payments without direct provider billing. You cannot do that, Chase said, his voice shaking. I have payroll due on Friday. Then I suggest you sell some inventory, Marion said, not even looking at him. She kept her gaze on me. This order returns the trust to its original purpose, a safety net, not a hammock. It stops the bleeding immediately. She flipped the page. Underneath Order A was a second document. Order B, she said. The Cooper Grandchildren Educational and Health Trust. I looked at the title, Beneficiaries. Leo Cooper and Sam Cooper. This is a restructuring order, Marion said. If you sign this, a separate, inviolable subtrust is created for your nephews. It guarantees their private school tuition, their university funds, their health insurance, and any necessary therapy or developmental support until they are 25 years old. Chase sat up straighter. Well, that is good. That is fine. If the money goes to the kids, I can manage it. You misunderstand, Marion interrupted, her voice cutting like a scalpel. You will not manage it. Under Order B, the funds are paid directly to the providers. The check goes to the school. The wire goes to the hospital. The money never touches your hands. Chase, it never touches your bank account. You cannot borrow against it. You cannot leverage it for a loan. It is locked in a vault that only opens for the direct benefit of those two boys. Chase's face crumpled. He looked at the document with genuine horror. You do not trust me with my own children's money. Based on the ledger we just reviewed, Marion said. No, we do not. She looked at me. This ensures that no matter what happens to your brother's business or your parents' retirement, those boys will be educated and healthy. They cease to be bargaining chips. You remove the leverage your family has used against you. I looked over at the corner of the room. Leo and Sam were still there, huddled together. Leo was showing Sam something on the game screen, whispering gently. They were innocent. They were the hostages in a war they did not know was being fought. Order B was not a punishment. It was a rescue mission. And finally, Marion said, reaching for the single sheet of paper clipped to the left side of the folder. Order C. She slid it toward me. The self-limitation clause. I read the text. It was even shorter than the others. Order C. Tertiary heir. Voluntary restriction. What is this? I asked. This is the ethical constant. Marion said. If you sign orders A and B, you must also sign Order C. It states that for the next 12 months, you, Isla Cooper, agree to be bound by the same restrictions as the rest of the family. You will receive a modest monthly stipend for living expenses, rent, food, basic needs, but you will have zero access to discretionary funds. You cannot withdraw a lump sum. You cannot buy a new car. You cannot take a vacation on the trust's dime. She paused, letting the silence stretch. If you are going to judge them, Marion said softly, you must show that you are different from them. You are not doing this to seize the hoard for yourself. You are doing this to clean the wound. You take the medicine along with the patient. I stared at the paper. It was brilliant. It was cruel. But it was brilliant. It stripped away any argument that I was being greedy. It made my decision purely about survival and principle. She is crazy, Mom screamed. The sudden noise made me jump. Mom was standing up, her face twisted into a mask of ugly, raw fury. She pointed a shaking finger at Marion, then at me. She does not understand anything, Mom yelled. She works in a lab. She looks at microscopes all day. What does she know about managing a family? What does she know about the real world? This is cruel. This is a vendetta. You are destroying this family because you are bitter that we have a life and you are alone. Amy, sit down, Victor said, his voice rumbling from the head of the table. No, Mom shouted, turning on him. You did this. You poisoned her. She was a good daughter before today. She helped us. She loved us. And you turned her into this cold-hearted accountant. She looked at me, her eyes pleading and hateful all at once. Isla, look at me. We are your parents. We raised you. We fed you. How can you sit there and think about cutting us off over money? It is just paper. Isla, family is blood. Blood, I repeated. The word hung in the air. Chase stood up next. He didn't scream. He leaned across the table, his face contorted with a sneer that looked terrified. You think you are better than me, he spat. Is that it? You think because you went to college and got that fancy job that you are the smart one? You are just a worker drone. Isla, I am an entrepreneur. I take risks. He pointed at the blue folder. And do not pretend you are some saint. If you weren't hiding your Helix Point money, we wouldn't be in this mess. You have a stockpile. I know you do. You probably have $50,000 sitting in an account somewhere while I'm begging for scraps. If you had just shared like a real sister, none of this would have happened. I looked at him. He truly believed it. He believed that my assets were community property. He believed that my refusal to bankrupt myself completely was an act of theft against him. I have $600 in my savings account. Chase, I said quietly, And I have $60 in my checking account from selling my plasma yesterday. Liar, Chase hissed. You are just greedy. I turned to my father. He was the only one who hadn't stood up. He was sitting slumped in his chair, looking like a man whose skeleton had been removed. Dad? I asked. He looked up. His eyes were wet and red. He looked at the folder, then at me. Isla, he said, his voice cracking. If you do not sign anything, if you just walk away. He trailed off, licking his dry lips. Yes, I asked. If you do not sign, he whispered, then everything continues as it was, right? The letters stop coming. The checks keep coming. We just go back to how it was on Monday. The question hit me harder than Mom's screaming or Chase's insults. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't arguing that he was right. He was just begging for the path of least resistance. He wanted the comfort of the dysfunction. He wanted me to go back to being the battery so he didn't have to be the engine. Yes, Dad, I said, my voice trembling. If I do not sign, it goes back to normal. You get your money, Chase gets his bailout, and I go back to the clinic next week. He nodded slowly, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Well, that does not sound so bad. We can make it up to you. We can pay you back later. When the bar takes off, it was pathetic. And it broke the last thread of guilt, holding my heart together. Isla, Victor's voice cut through the pathetic tableau. I looked at the head of the table. My grandfather was watching me. He wasn't telling me what to do. He was just observing. You have a choice, Victor said, and it is not about the money. It is about the ecosystem. He gestured to the corner where Leo and Sam were sitting. The boys had looked up at the shouting. Fear etched on their small faces. You cannot save everyone, Victor said. But you have to decide what model you want those boys to learn. Do you want them to grow up in the same model your father lives in, a model where love is transactional and responsibility is something you outsource to the women in the family? He looked at Dad, then back at me. Or do you want them to learn something else? I looked at Order B. Cooper Grandchildren, Educational and Health Trust. I remembered the nights I spent helping Leo with his math homework because Chase was too busy networking. I remembered Sam telling me he wanted to be an engineer because he liked how things fit together. If I did nothing, Chase would drain their futures just like he drained mine. He would use their tuition money for a liquor license. He would use their dental fund for a new sound system. And 20 years from now, Leo and Sam would be sitting in a waiting room with a voucher in their hands, wondering why they had to bleed to keep their father afloat. The question shifted in my mind. It wasn't, should I punish my family anymore? It was, do I have the courage to amputate the limb to save the patient? I was a biologist. I knew about infection. I knew that you didn't cure gangrene with a bandage and a hug. You cured it with a blade. And it hurt. God, it hurt. But it was the only way to survive. Marion Lowell reached out and closed the blue folder. She placed a black metal pen on top of it. It was heavy, cold, and precise. Not signing is also a choice, Ms. Cooper, Marion said. It is an endorsement of the status quo. It keeps the current flow alive. She looked at the bandage on my arm. You must decide, she said. Is that flow blood, or is it poison? I looked at my hand. It was resting on the table next to the folder. My fist was clenched so tight that my knuckles were stark white. The skin stretched thin over the bone. Below the cuff of my thrift store coat, the edge of the blue cobalt tape from the Riverline Plasma Center peeked out. It was a physical marker of my reality. Real blood, real pain, real exhaustion. Opposite me, my mother was adjusting her expensive coat, looking at me with expectant, demanding eyes. My brother was sneering, checking his watch. My father was waiting for me to fix it. Just like I fixed the roof. Just like I fixed the tax bill. They were waiting for me to bleed. I reached out and took the pen. The metal was freezing against my skin. I am not doing this for you, I said to my family. My voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence of the glass room, it sounded like thunder. I looked at Leo and Sam. I am doing this for them, I said, and I am doing this for me. I opened the folder. The paper of Order A was crisp and white. It waited for my signature like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, terrified rhythm, but my hand was steady. I positioned the pen over the signature line. The ink was black. The choice was made. I need a moment, I said. The words felt heavy in my mouth, like stones I had been carrying for a decade. I did not wait for permission. I did not look at my mother's stunned face or my brother's sneer. I placed the black metal pen down on the table, precisely parallel to the edge of the blue leather folder, and I turned my back on them. The glass door leading to the terrace was heavy. I had to put my shoulder into it to push it open, breaking the hermetic seal of the conference room. The moment I stepped out, the wind hit me. It was a biting, late November wind that whipped my hair across my face and cut through my thrift store wool coat. I let the door click shut behind me, muffling the sounds of the argument that had instantly erupted the second I left the table. I walked to the edge of the balcony. We were 20 stories up. Below me, the city was a grid of gray concrete and asphalt, pulsed through by the arteries of traffic. I leaned my forehead against the cold, thick safety glass of the railing. The sensation was shocking, a sudden freeze that cleared the fog in my brain. It reminded me of the cold room at Helix Point. I closed my eyes and for a second, I was back there. The hum of the ventilation system, the smell of ozone and sterilized plastic, the feeling of being alone in a universe of data. I had felt safe there, in the lab. Variables could be controlled. If a reaction failed, you could trace the error. If a sample was corrupted, you isolated it. I looked down at the traffic again. From this height, the cars looked like blood cells flowing through a vein. The red taillights were oxygenated blood leaving the heart. The white headlights were the depleted blood returning to be refilled. I thought about the physiology of hemorrhage. It was the first thing you learned in trauma biology. When a body is losing blood, the heart beats faster. It tries to compensate. It pumps harder, desperate to push oxygen to the vital organs. But if the wound is not closed, that extra effort just kills the patient faster. It pumps the remaining life out of the body at an accelerated rate. That was what I had been doing. For 15 years, I had been the heart pumping harder. Every time my family sprung a leak, a lawsuit, a failed business, a vacation they could not afford, I had pumped more adrenaline, more money, more of my own life force into the system to keep the pressure up. I thought I was saving the patient. I was wrong. I was just feeding the bleed. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a jarring buzz against my hip. I pulled it out, my fingers stiff from the cold. The screen lit up. It wasn't a Team Cooper group chat notification. It wasn't a demand from Chase. It was Lucas Grant. I stared at the name. Lucas was a senior researcher at Helix Point. He was the guy who used to bring me coffee at 3 a.m. when I was running sequences. He was the one who had found me crying in the supply closet that day. The one who had gently taken the pipette from my shaking hand and told me to go home. He wasn't a boyfriend. He wasn't a savior. He was just a decent human being who understood the science of burnout. I swiped right. Cooper? His voice was tinny against the wind, but warm. I know you said you wanted space, but I had a feeling. Today is the 20th, the severance package finalization date. I wanted to make sure you did not let them bully you into signing away your stock options. I let out a breath that turned into white steam in the cold air. Lucas, you sound like you are standing on a roof, he said. I am on a balcony, I said. At the Northbridge Foundation. There was a pause. Northbridge. As in the Heritage Trust, I thought that was a myth your mom told you to explain why you could not go to summer camp. It is real, I said. It is very real, and it is bleeding. Isla, Lucas said, his voice dropping, losing the casual banter. Listen to me. I do not know what is happening up there, but I know you. I know that your instinct is to fix things. You see a broken data set. You want to repair it. You see a gap. You want to bridge it. He paused. But you cannot fix a system that is designed to consume you. Remember the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy increases, disorder increases, unless you put energy in, but you are out of energy. Cooper, you are running on fumes. I sold plasma yesterday, I admitted. The confession tumbled out before I could stop it. For $60? Jesus, Isla, Lucas breathed. Okay, listen to me. Whatever choice you are making right now, whatever piece of paper is in front of you, do not do it to make them stop screaming. They will never stop screaming. Do it so you can survive. Do not sell another drop to that machine. You are a scientist, not a fuel source. I am afraid, I whispered. If I stop, they fall? Gravity is not your fault, Lucas said firmly. Let them fall. Maybe they will finally learn how to stand up. I lowered the phone. Thank you. Lucas? Call me when you are done, he said. I will buy you a burger, a real one, not ramen. I hung up. The silence rushed back in, but it felt different now. It felt less lonely. A second later, a text message popped up. It was from Aunt Nora, my father's sister, who had been exiled from the family years ago for refusing to lend Chase money for his first failed venture. Aunt Nora. The boys are texting me. Apparently, it is World War III over there. Just wanted to send you this. Leo drew it this morning before they dragged him into the car. An image loaded. It was a photo of a piece of notebook paper. On it, drawn in crayon, was a stick figure with long brown hair holding a calculator. Next to it were two smaller stick figures holding hands. There were hearts drawn all over the margins, and in shaky, childish block letters, it said, Auntie Isla is the best at math. I stared at the drawing. The lines were crooked. The hearts were lopsided. Leo didn't draw a bar. He didn't draw a stack of money. He didn't draw a new sound system. He drew me doing math. He didn't care about the legacy. He didn't care about the lounge concept. He cared that I sat with him and helped him understand fractions when his father was too busy playing businessman. My mother's words from the email echoed in my mind. She is weak like that. Use the kids. They thought my love for those boys was a weakness. They thought it was a soft spot where they could insert the needle. They were wrong. It wasn't a weakness. It was the only thing strong enough to make me do what I had to do. I looked at the traffic again. The red and white lights blurred together. A memory surfaced. A flashback so vivid I could smell the liquid nitrogen. I was back in the lab at Helix Point, 3 years ago. We had a contamination event in the primary culture line. A virus had gotten into the samples. Dr. Aris stood next to me, looking at the tray of petri dishes. It is just one dish, sir. I had argued. Maybe we can treat it. Maybe we can isolate the healthy cells and save the culture. Dr. Aris had shaken his head. No. Isla. When a biological system is compromised by a pathogen that mimics the host, you cannot negotiate with it. You cannot treat it in the dish. If you try to save the infected parts, you lose the whole line. He had pointed to the cryofreezer. You freeze it, you drop the temperature to minus 80 degrees. You stop all biological activity. It is the only way to halt the replication of the virus and protect the integrity of the remaining samples. But it kills the active cells. I had said, it puts them in stasis. He corrected. It stops the growth. But it stops the rot. I blinked, and the city came back into focus. The trust was the body. The money was the blood. My father, my mother, my brother. They were the infection. They weren't evil people in the sense of villains in a cartoon. They were just pathogens. They consumed resources and produced toxins, debt, guilt, lies. They couldn't help it. It was their nature. They had been allowed to replicate unchecked for 15 years, and Leo and Sam. They were the healthy tissue. They were the future of the line. If I let the infection run wild, it would consume them too. It would turn them into replicas of Chase entitled, anxious, hollow men waiting for a check. I looked at my hands. They were pale against the dark glass. I was the cryofreezer. Order A wasn't a punishment. It was a drop in temperature. It was order freeze. I finally understood what Marion meant. a discretionary freeze. I wasn't killing them. I was putting them in stasis. I was stopping the metabolic process that was killing us all. I was cutting off the nutrient supply to the virus so the healthy cells could survive. And Victor's words in the waiting room finally clicked into place. This time, you are not the one who is going to be drained. He hadn't meant that he was going to give me money. He meant that he was giving me the power to stop the transfusion. He was giving me the clamp. The guilt that had been sitting on my chest for a decade began to fracture. It cracked and fell away like old plaster. This wasn't revenge. Revenge was hot. Revenge was screaming and throwing things. This was surgery. Surgery was cold. Surgery was precise. Surgery hurt, and it left scars. But it was necessary to save the life of the patient. I looked down at my left arm. The sleeve of my coat was pulled up slightly, revealing the blue cobalt bandage from Riverline Plasma. It was ugly. It was a badge of my submission. It was a physical receipt for the part of myself I had sold to buy their affection. I reached over with my right hand and dug my fingernails into the edge of the tape. It stuck fast to my skin and arm hair. I pulled. It stung a sharp, ripping pain that felt grounding. I pulled harder, peeling the blue strip away from my skin. It came off with a sound like tearing fabric. Underneath, the puncture wound was a small, ugly purple dot. A bruise was blooming around it, yellow and green. The track mark of a person who had been used. I balled the blue tape up in my fist. It was sticky and gross. I looked at the trash can standing next to the glass door. It was a sleek, brushed metal cylinder. I walked over to it. I held my hand over the opening. "That is it," I whispered to the wind. "That is the last drop." I dropped the ball of tape. It fell into the darkness of the bin with a soft rustle. I wasn't just throwing away a bandage. I was throwing away the script. I was throwing away the role of the martyr. I was throwing away the girl who ate frozen pizza on her birthday while her family ate steak. I took a deep breath. The air was freezing, but it tasted clean. It tasted like oxygen. I turned around and faced the glass door. Through the pane, I could see them. My mother was pacing, gesturing wildly. Chase was slumped in his chair, looking sullen. Dad was wiping his eyes. Victor sat at the head of the table, a silent stone monolith, waiting. They looked small. From out here, disconnected from their noise, they looked like children throwing a tantrum because the candy store was closed. I smoothed down the front of my coat. I brushed a strand of wind-blown hair out of my eyes. I didn't try to fix it. I liked the wildness. I liked that I looked like someone who had just stood in a storm and survived. I reached for the door handle. It was heavy, solid metal. I wasn't walking back in there to argue. I wasn't walking back in there to explain. I was walking back in there to execute an order. I pulled the door open. The warmth of the room rushed out to meet me, carrying the scent of expensive leather and stale perfume. I stepped over the threshold. My step was heavy, grounded. My hands were bare. My arm was exposed, the purple bruise visible for everyone to see. But I didn't pull my sleeve down to hide it. Let them see the cost. I walked to the table. I looked Victor in the eye. He nodded, a microscopic movement of his chin. I looked at the pen. It was waiting. I was ready to close the valve. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped back into the climate-controlled silence of the conference room. The warmth hit me first, smelling of expensive leather and the lingering, stale scent of my family's panic. My mother, Amy, was the first to react. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. Her mascara smudged in jagged lines down her cheeks. She looked less like the matriarch she pretended to be and more like a child who had been told the party was over. "Isla," she choked out, her voice trembling with a mix of grief and accusation. "You are killing this family. You are killing us over a few numbers on a spreadsheet. When did you become so cold I do not recognize you anymore?" I walked past her without a word. I pulled out the heavy leather chair at the foot of the table and sat down. I placed my hands flat on the polished wood. Right next to the blue folder, Chase was vibrating with rage. His face was a mottled purple, veins bulging in his neck. He slammed his hand down on the table. A violent, hollow sound that made the water glasses rattle. "If you sign those papers," Chase hissed, leaning over the table until his spit landed near my hand. "I consider myself an only child. You are dead to me. You are a traitor. Isla, you are betraying your own blood for him." He jerked a thumb toward Victor. I looked at my father. Leon Cooper was slumped in his chair, staring at his hands. He looked small. He looked defeated. "Dad," I asked softly. He looked up, his eyes wet. "Isla," he mumbled, his voice thick with self-pity. "If you loved this family, really loved us, you would not do this. You would find another way. Love is about sacrifice, honey." There it was, the Cooper family motto. Love is payment. Love is sacrifice. Love is letting them carve pieces off you until there is nothing left but a skeleton writing checks. I looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time in years, I didn't see a victim. I saw a man who had chosen the path of least resistance every single day of his life. I turned my gaze to Marion Lowell. She was standing at the head of the table, her hand hovering over the black metal pen. She gave me a barely perceptible nod. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, filtered air of the 20th floor. "Marion," I said, my voice steady and eerily calm. "Execute Order A." My mother let out a scream. It was a sharp, piercing sound of pure denial. Chase stood up so fast his chair tipped backward and crashed onto the floor. He lunged toward me, his hands reaching across the table as if he intended to physically rip the document away from me. "No!" he roared. The large security guard who had been standing silently by the door took one single, heavy step forward. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't shout. He just moved into Chase's peripheral vision, a massive wall of black wool and muscle. Chase froze. He looked at the guard, then at me, his hands shaking in the air, impotent and furious. Victor Cooper raised his hand. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The room fell instantly silent, save for the ragged, heavy breathing of my mother and brother. "Sit down. Chase," Victor said. His voice was not loud, but it was final. Chase righted his chair and sat, glaring at me with hatred burning in his eyes. I picked up the document labeled Order A. I smoothed the paper with my thumb. "From today," I said, speaking slowly and clearly, looking at each of them in turn. "The trust is closed to requests. No more emergency bailouts for the bar. No more paying off lawsuits because you broke a contract. No more monthly partner meetings that are just bills for cocktails and steak dinners." "You think that money belongs to you?" Chase screamed, unable to help himself. "That is our money. Grandpa abandoned Dad. He left us to rot. I am just taking back what belongs to me. I am taking what is owed." Victor leaned forward, his blue-gray eyes hard as flint. "And you take what is owed by forcing your sister to sell her own blood?" Victor asked. His voice was ice-cold. "You reclaim your birthright by draining hers." Chase opened his mouth to argue, but the reality of the question silenced him. He looked at the bruise on my arm, then looked away, muttering something about how I volunteered. I ignored him. I turned the page in the leather folder. "Marion," I said. "Execute Order B." My mother gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "The Cooper Grandchildren Educational and Health Trust is now active," I said. My voice softened as I looked toward the corner of the room where Leo and Sam were watching, wide-eyed and silent. "From this moment on, Leo and Sam have their own protected funds. Tuition goes to the school, medical bills go to the doctor, therapy, clothes, camps, it is all covered." I looked back at Chase. "But not one single penny goes through you. You do not get to touch it. You do not get to manage it. And you definitely do not get to use their names to guilt me into giving you cash ever again." "You are stealing them," Mom sobbed, grabbing Dad's arm. "She is stealing my grandchildren. She is trying to buy them." "No one is stealing anyone, Mrs. Cooper," Marion interjected, her tone professional and cutting. We are simply removing your ability to hold their future hostage. We are taking the wallet out of your hands, not the children." I reached out and picked up the black metal pen. It was cold against my skin. It felt heavy, substantial. It felt like a weapon I should have picked up 10 years ago. My hand did not shake. I looked at the tip of the pen, then at my family. "My whole life," I said. "I have sold my blood, my time, and my health so that you would not have to feel any pain. I ate instant noodles so you could eat steak. I walked so you could drive. I bled so you could drink." I locked eyes with my mother. "Today, I decided on one simple thing," I said. "From this moment on, I will not bleed for you anymore." I lowered the pen to the paper. The sound of the nib scratching against the document was loud in the silent room. Scritch, scratch. I signed my name. Isla Elise Cooper. I dated it. November 20th. It sounded like a lock clicking shut. It sounded like a guillotine blade dropping. It sounded like freedom. I flipped the page to Order B. The screen behind Victor flashed. The spreadsheet updated in real time. I watched the numbers in the column labeled Discretionary Reserves drain away, transferring instantly into a new column labeled Protected Minor Trust. $600,000 moved in the blink of an eye. It moved from Chase's reach to Leo's future. I signed the second document. I put the pen down. Marion reached over and closed the blue leather folder. The sound was a soft thud, like a book closing on a long, tragic story. "The freeze is effective immediately," Marion announced. "All banking institutions have been notified electronically. Any pending transfers from the Leon Cooper branch that have not cleared are now void. Any credit cards linked to the discretionary fund have been deactivated." She looked at Chase. "I believe you have a wire transfer scheduled for tomorrow morning for your legal settlement. That has been canceled. You will need to find alternative funding." Mom put her head down on the table and began to weep. Loud, heaving sobs that sounded more like a performance than genuine sorrow. Chase stared at me. His face was pale, stripped of its anger, leaving only fear. "You are going to regret this," he whispered. "One day, you are going to need us. You are going to get sick, or lonely, or in trouble, and you are going to reach out, and no one is going to be there." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taken everything and given nothing. "Chase," I said, standing up. "That is exactly how I have lived with this family for 10 years. I have been alone in this room with you my whole life." I turned to Victor. The old man stood up. He walked around the table until he was standing in front of me. He was tall, towering over me, but he didn't feel threatening. He felt solid. He placed a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm. "I am not proud that I kept the money," Victor said quietly, so only I could hear. "Money is just paper. I am proud that you finally had the courage to place the tourniquet." He looked at the bandage on my arm, at the purple bruise I had exposed on the balcony. "From here on out, you do not have to sell blood, Isla," he said. "If you want to work with blood, you do it in a laboratory. You do it on a microscope slide. You do it to save lives, not to pay for your brother's mistakes. Do you understand me?" "I understand," I whispered. "Go," he said. "Walk out of here. Do not look back." I turned away from the table. I turned away from my mother's sobbing, from my father's silence, from my brother's hate. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. I walked to the double doors. The security guard opened them for me. I stepped into the hallway, walked to the elevator, and rode it down to the lobby in silence. When I stepped out of the Northbridge Foundation building, the late autumn wind hit me again. It was colder now, biting at my cheeks, but it felt bracing. It felt like the world was waking me up. I reached into my pocket and wrapped my hand around my phone. It was vibrating continuously. Buzz, buzz, buzz. I pulled it out. The screen was lit up with notifications from the Team Cooper group chat, walls of text from Chase, voice memos from Mom, threats, guilt, begging. I looked at the screen for a second, then I slid the silence switch on the side of the phone. Click. I dropped the phone back into my pocket. I touched the inside of my elbow, running my finger over the spot where the tape had been. The skin was tender, but it was healing. The bruise would fade in a week. The scars would take longer, but they would heal too. I started walking down the street, 2 blocks away. I passed another plasma donation center. It looked just like Riverline. The same flickering neon sign, the same peeling paint. A sandwich board on the sidewalk read, "Holiday Special." Earn up to $60 per donation. I stopped. I looked at the sign. Yesterday, that sign had looked like a lifeline. It had looked like survival. Today, it looked like a trap I had finally chewed my leg out of. I smiled. It was a tired smile, a small curve of my lips, but it was real. "Keep your $60, I whispered to the empty street. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself and walked toward the subway. I was going home, not to the home where I was a daughter or a sister or a victim, but to the home where I was just Ela. And for the first time in my life, every drop of blood in my veins belonged to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I would love to know how far Isla's story has traveled. Do not forget to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button to help more people hear this story.